You were told to eat less and move more. And you did exactly that. You counted, you cut back, you walked, you sweated, you were not lazy and you were not weak, and the weight came back anyway. And this book argues that the advice itself is broken. That is a strange and slightly frightening idea, so let me say it gently and slowly, because it deserves care. For most of your life, you have probably been handed one explanation for why bodies gain weight. The explanation goes like this. Food carries energy. We measure that energy in units called calories. A calorie is just a tiny measurement of how much fuel is in your food, the way a liter measures petrol. If you eat more calories than you burn, the leftover gets stored as fat. If you eat fewer than you burn, the body dips into its fat to make up the difference, and you shrink. Eat less, move more, and the maths will save you? It sounds so clean. It sounds like a bank account. Money in, money out, and your body fat is the balance sitting in the middle. And that picture is exactly what a Canadian doctor named Jason Fung set out to challenge in a book called The Obesity Code, published in 2016. Today I want to walk you through the whole of that book, its real argument, its real chapters, the shape of the thing, and I want to do it honestly. That means 2 jobs, not 1. The first job is to explain what Fung actually says as clearly and fairly as I can, so that if you have never heard of him, you will understand exactly why so many people found his book electric. The second job, and I promise I will not skip it, is to hold his ideas up to the wider science and tell you plainly where he is on solid ground, where he is on softer ground, and where he is frankly reaching further than the evidence allows, because a good explanation of a health book is not a sales pitch for it. And before we go a single step further, let me say the thing I will say again at the end. Everything here is general education, an attempt to understand a set of ideas. It is not medical advice, it is not a diet plan for you, and nothing in it should replace a real conversation with a doctor who knows your body and your history. So let me introduce the man, because it matters. Jason Fung is a kidney doctor, a nephrologist, which just means a specialist in kidneys, working in Toronto. He trained in medicine at the University of Toronto and did further training in kidney disease in Los Angeles. Now, why would a kidney doctor write a famous book about fat? Because of what he kept seeing. Kidneys get wrecked by type 2 diabetes, which is a disease where the body loses control of blood sugar. And type 2 diabetes travels hand in hand with obesity. Year after year, Fung watched patients arrive with failing kidneys downstream of diabetes, downstream of weight, and he watched the standard advice fail them. And around 2012, he started a clinic focused on treating those patients with fasting, deliberately going without food for planned stretches of time. So keep this in your back pocket as we go. Fung is a working doctor and a passionate advocate, and that is a real credential. But he is not himself an obesity researcher running controlled experiments. He is a clinician with a theory and a great gift for explaining it. Both of those things can be true at once, and holding both is exactly the honest posture this book deserves. Now here is the question underneath the whole book, and I want you to really feel it, because it is the question that made me want to make this episode. Why does eating less fail so many people? Not everyone. Some people cut their food, lose weight, and keep it off, and good for them. But a huge number of people do everything they were told. They genuinely eat less, they genuinely move more, they are not lying and they are not cheating, and after a while the weight creeps back on. The usual answer that gets whispered or shouted is that these people are weak. They lack willpower. They cheated when nobody was looking. And Fung's book begins by refusing that answer. His starting move is almost a moral one. He says, what if the people are not broken? What if the advice is broken? What if we have misunderstood what obesity even is? To understand his alternative, I want to give you the single picture to carry through this entire episode. Forget the bank account. Picture instead a thermostat. You know how a thermostat works. You set it to a certain temperature, say 20 degrees, and the heating system fights to keep the room at that number. Open a window and let cold air in the heater roars to bring it back up. Light a fire and overheat the room. The system shuts the heating off to bring it back down. The thermostat is not passive. It defends a target. It pushes back against anything that moves the room away from the number it is set to. Fung's central claim is that your body fat works like that thermostat, not like that bank account. Your body, he says, has a set weight, a defended level of fat it is trying to hold the way the thermostat holds the temperature. And when you cut your calories and lose weight, you are like someone opening a window in a heated room. The body notices the drop and fights back to defend its setting. It turns down your metabolism so you burn less. It turns up your hunger so you eat more. It makes you cold, tired, and obsessed with food, all to drag you back to the weight it wants. That, he argues, is why eating less fails. You are not fighting a bank balance that will politely go down when you deposit less. You are fighting a defense system that treats your weight loss as a problem to be corrected. And then comes the crucial extra piece, the piece the whole book turns on. What sets the thermostat? What decides the number your body is defending? Fung's answer is a hormone. A hormone is just a chemical messenger, a little note your body sends through the blood to tell organs what to do. And the messenger at the heart of this book is called insulin. Insulin is the dial on the thermostat. Turn insulin up, and the body sets its fat thermostat higher. It wants to hold more fat. Turn insulin down, and the thermostat setting drops. The body is willing to let fat go. So in Fung's model, obesity is not fundamentally about eating too much. It is about a thermostat stuck too high, and the thing jamming the dial upward is chronically high insulin. That single reframing from bank account to thermostat, from willpower to hormones, from calories to insulin is the beating heart of the obesity code, and everything else in the book is built to support it. Let me now walk you through the actual shape of the book, because it is built with real care in 6 parts, and following its arc is the best way to understand the argument. The first part is called The Epidemic, and it does something clever. It asks, when did we all get fat and why? Because obesity was not always common. It rose dramatically over the last several decades, and Fung argues that timing is a clue. If obesity exploded in a particular era, then something changed in that era, and whatever changed is a suspect. He points at the shift toward eating more often and eating more refined, processed carbohydrate, the white flour, the sugar, the snacks engineered to be eaten all day long. He also, in the second chapter, tackles inheritance, the uncomfortable fact that obesity runs in families. He leans on studies of adopted children and of twins, and he lands on a striking figure that something like 70% of your tendency toward obesity may be inherited. Now hold that number loosely, because it comes to us through summaries rather than from a stopwatch, and different studies say different things. But his point is emotional as much as numerical. If most of your tendency is written into your genes, then obesity cannot simply be a personal failing of the weak. Nobody chooses to inherit a thermostat set high. The second part is where the book sharpens its knife, and it is called The Calorie Deception. This is Fung's frontal assault on the eat less, move more model, and he goes at it hard. He even gives the calorie restriction approach a mocking little nickname to signal how little he thinks of it. His argument is that the whole model rests on a hidden and false assumption, the assumption that calories in and calories out are independent of each other. The tidy maths only works if the energy you eat and the energy you burn are two separate dials that do not touch. But Fung says they are wired together. Turn one down and the other follows. Eat much less, and your body does not just quietly run at a deficit, it turns down the burning to match. The window opens and the heater roars. To make this vivid, he reaches for a haunting piece of history, an experiment from the middle of the 1940s, led by a scientist named Ansel Keys, sometimes called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. A group of healthy young men agreed to eat roughly half their normal food for months, so that scientists could study starvation and how to recover from it. And what happened to them is the whole point. They did lose weight, yes, but their bodies revolted. Their basal metabolism, the baseline energy the body burns just to keep you alive, to beat your heart and warm your skin and think your thoughts, fell dramatically by something like 40%. They became cold all the time. They became weak and listless. And above all, they became utterly obsessed with food, dreaming about it, reading recipes, hoarding, unable to think about anything else. Their thermostats, in Fung's language, were screaming to bring the weight back. The men were not weak. They were healthy volunteers under scientific supervision, and their bodies still fought them tooth and nail. That, says Fung, is what a calorie deficit really feels like from the inside, and it is why cutting calories is so brutal and so temporary. Then he brings the same lesson into our own time with a famous and rather sad follow-up study, published in 2016, of contestants from a television weight loss competition where people lost enormous amounts of weight very fast through severe dieting and exercise. Researchers tracked them for years afterward, and what they found was that most of the contestants regained much of the weight, and, more chillingly, their metabolism stayed suppressed. Years later, their bodies were still burning hundreds of calories a day, less than you would expect for their size, as if the thermostat, once alarmed, refused to stand down. Fung reads this as powerful evidence that the body adapts against calorie restriction and defends its set weight long after the diet ends. I will come back later and add some honest nuance to how we read that study, but on the plain fact that metabolic adaptation to dieting is real, Fung is standing on well-documented ground. The body genuinely does fight back. That is not fringe, that is accepted. Inside this second part, he also takes on exercise in a chapter he provocatively titles The Exercise Myth, and I want to be very careful to state him fairly. because this is the part most easily twisted. Fung does not say exercise is bad. He does not tell anyone to stop moving. He is emphatic that exercise is wonderful for your health, your heart, your mood, your muscles, your sleep. What he says is narrower and honestly fairly well supported. He says exercise is a weak tool for weight loss specifically. Why? Because the number of calories you burn in a workout is modest compared to what you eat, and because the body compensates. Run in the morning and your appetite quietly rises to replace what you burned, or you unconsciously move less and rest more for the remainder of the day. The thermostat rebalances. So exercise for your health, absolutely, he says, but do not expect the treadmill to be the lever that empties your fat stores. The lever in his model is somewhere else entirely. And that sets up the whole next part. The third part is the intellectual core of the book and is called A New Model of Obesity. Here Fung finally builds his hormonal engine in full. He walks through insulin properly. Every time you eat, particularly when you eat refined carbohydrate and sugar, your blood sugar rises, and your body releases insulin to deal with it. Insulin's job is to move that sugar out of the blood and into storage. And here is the part that matters. For fat, insulin is fundamentally a storage hormone. When insulin is high, the body is in storage mode. It tucks energy away as fat, and crucially, it blocks the burning of fat. You cannot easily unlock the fat cupboard while insulin is holding the key. So in Fung's picture, insulin is the dial on the thermostat, and constant eating keeps that dial turned up all day long. If you are eating from breakfast through snacks, through dinner, through evening nibbles, your insulin rarely falls, your body rarely leaves storage mode, and the fat stays locked in. He then adds a second, darker turn, and this is the mechanism that makes the whole thing a trap rather than a simple switch. It is called insulin resistance, and it gets its own chapter as, in his words, the major player. Resistance just means the body stops listening properly to a signal it has heard too much. Think of a smell you stop noticing because it is always there, or a warning sound so constant that you tune it out. When insulin is high all the time, the body's cells grow deaf to it. And when the cells stop responding, the body's answer is to shout louder, to pump out even more insulin to get the same job done. But more insulin means even more storage, even more fat locked away, and even more deafness. Round and round it goes. High insulin causes resistance. Resistance causes higher insulin. Higher insulin jams the thermostat further up. That vicious circle, Fung argues, is what obesity actually is at the level of machinery, not gluttony. A hormonal spiral. He even names the villain condition hyperinsulinemia, which is just a long word meaning too much insulin in the blood for too long. In this same part, he brings in the supporting cast of hormones. Because insulin does not act alone, there is cortisol, the stress hormone, the chemical your body floods you with when you are under threat. The one behind that jittery, wired feeling before an exam or after bad news. Fung argues that chronic stress keeps cortisol high, that high cortisol nudges insulin up, and that this quietly drives fat, especially around the belly. That is why, right at the back of the book, he includes advice on sleep and on meditation not as fluffy extras, but as ways to lower cortisol and through it, insulin. He also introduces the appetite hormones. There is ghrelin, which you can remember because it makes your stomach growl. It is the hunger signal, the one that says eat now. And there is leptin, the satiety signal, the one that is meant to say you have had enough, you can stop. Fung argues that in obesity, the body becomes deaf to leptin 2, leptin resistance, so the off switch for appetite stops working, and the person feels hungry even with plenty of fat stored. But through all of this, insulin stays the lead character. The others are supporting players around his central dial. There is one more chapter in this part I want to flag, because it shows Fung engaging with an old rival. It concerns the low carbohydrate diet movement associated with the name Atkins, the famous approach of cutting carbohydrate hard. That movement rose, was mocked, and faded, and Fung treats its history as evidence for his own case that cutting carbohydrate lowers insulin and can drive real weight loss, and that the establishment scorn for it was, in his telling, misplaced. Whether you agree or not, it shows the book is not inventing its ideas from nothing. It is standing in a long contested argument about carbohydrate and hormones that has been running for decades. The fourth part widens the lens and is called the social phenomenon of obesity, and I find it one of the more humane sections, because here Fung admits that biology is not the whole story, that obesity is also social. He looks at the way big food companies profit from selling more food, more often, engineered to be irresistible and eaten constantly. He looks with real compassion at the link between poverty and obesity, the uncomfortable truth that in many wealthy countries it is often the poorest who are heaviest, because cheap calories tend to be exactly the refined, sugary, processed calories his model blames, And because healthy fresh food is expensive and takes time that a person working 2 jobs may not have. And he looks at childhood obesity, which unsettles the willpower story more than anything else, because it is very hard to call a small child gluttonous or lazy. If babies and toddlers are growing heavier, something in the environment and the food, not their character, must be doing it. This part is where the book stops being only a theory of molecules and becomes a theory about the world we have built. The fifth part gets specific about food, and it is called What's Wrong with Our Diet, and it moves through the major players one by one. He opens with fructose, a type of sugar found in table sugar and in the high fructose corn syrup poured into so many processed foods and drinks. Fung singles fructose out as especially harmful, and his reasoning is about where it goes. Fructose is handled mainly by the liver, and he argues that flooding the liver with it drives fatty liver and makes the liver itself insulin resistant, feeding the whole spiral. He treats sugar as uniquely fattening, worse than its calorie count alone would suggest. Now I owe you an honest flag here, and I will expand on it later, but let me plant it now. Reviewers have pointed out that much of the evidence Fung leans on for fructose being uniquely toxic comes from experiments feeding people enormous doses of pure, isolated fructose, amounts you would essentially never get from eating actual food. So the special toxicity claim is stronger in the book than in the balanced evidence. Hold that. He then turns to diet soda, and here he makes a point that surprises people. You might think artificial sweeteners, the zero-calorie chemicals in diet drinks, are the clever escape hatch, all the sweetness with none of the sugar. Fung is skeptical. He argues they do not reliably help people lose weight, and may still provoke insulin or appetite responses, or simply keep the craving for sweetness alive, so you seek it elsewhere. So he does not hand you diet soda as a solution. Then he rehabilitates the things that had been demonized. He defends fiber, the rough, indigestible part of plants, the stringy bit in celery, the husk on a grain, arguing that fiber blunts the sugar and insulin spike from a meal, which is part of why whole foods are gentler than processed ones. He even puts in a word for vinegar, the acetic acid in it, as something that softens the blood sugar response. And on protein, the stuff of meat and eggs and dairy, he offers a genuinely counterintuitive point that shows his model taken seriously protein also raises insulin, not as sharply as refined carbohydrate, but really through a mechanism involving gut signals. He is especially wary of highly processed dairy proteins like whey. So even protein in his world is not free of the dial. And then comes the chapter that, for a lot of readers, was the emotional turning point of the whole book. It is called Fat Phobia, and it Fung defends dietary fat, the fat in olive oil, in butter, in nuts, in avocado. For decades, we were told fat was the enemy, that eating fat made us fat and clogged our hearts, and we fled toward low-fat everything, which in practice often meant more sugar and more refined carbohydrate to make the low-fat food taste of anything. Fung argues this was a historic mistake, because natural fat has very little effect on insulin. It barely touches the dial. In his model, that makes fat close to innocent in the obesity story, and its long demonization a tragic wrong turn that may have pushed us toward the very refined carbohydrate that jammed the thermostat up. Whatever you make of it, you can feel why this landed. It told a generation of people that a food they had been taught to fear was not the villain after all. Which brings us, at last, to the sixth part, the payoff, simply called the solution. And here is something I genuinely admire about the structure Fung splits the solution into two questions that we usually collapse into one. What to eat and when to eat. The what is, by this point, what you would expect. Cut the added sugar. Cut the refined grains and processed carbohydrate. Eat enough protein but not mountains of it. Do not fear natural fats. Eat whole, high fiber, real foods, the kind that come from a farm rather than a factory. If the book stopped there, it would be a sane, fairly mainstream whole foods message dressed in hormonal language. But Fung's real signature is the second question, when to eat, and his answer is the one that made him famous. Stop eating so often. He argues that the simple modern habit of eating all day long, 3 meals plus constant snacks, keeps insulin permanently elevated, and that this frequency is itself a cause of the problem, separate from what is on the plate, and his central prescription flows straight from that, intermittent fasting. Fasting just means going without food for a planned stretch, deliberately, with water and tea and coffee still allowed. It might be squeezing all your eating into an 8-hour window and fasting for the other 16. It might be a full 24 hours now, and it might, under care, be longer. The logic is beautifully simple within his model. If insulin is the dial, and the dial only comes down when you are not eating, then the most direct way to lower insulin is to spend real time not eating, to give the body long stretches in the fasted state where insulin falls, the storage lock releases, and the body finally reaches into its own fat for fuel. When to eat. he says, is the missing half of the puzzle, every bit as important as what to eat. The book closes with practical appendices, sample meal plans, a guide to fasting, and that advice on sleep and meditation to calm cortisol. And it is careful, at least in principle, to frame all of this as general education rather than a personal medical prescription. It even opens with a foreword from a well-known low-carbohydrate professor, placing it firmly in that camp. So that is the book, honestly and fully laid out. And now I owe you the harder half, the reality check, because if I stopped here, I would be handing you a beautifully told theory dressed up as settled fact. And it is not settled fact. This is where I have to slow right down and be careful, because the honest truth has two sides and both matter. Let me start with what is genuinely wrong with the science, or at least genuinely contested, because Fung writes with tremendous confidence and the evidence underneath is shakier than his tone suggests. Fung's whole framework has a proper academic name. It is called the carbohydrate insulin model, the idea that dietary carbohydrate drives insulin drives fat storage drives obesity. And it is important for you to know that this model is not accepted consensus. It is one side of a live, unresolved scientific argument. On the other side stands what is called the energy balance model, the more traditional view that, at bottom, body weight is still governed by the total energy you take in versus the total energy you spend. The most prominent voice on that other side is a researcher at the American National Institutes of Health named Kevin Hall, and he and others have argued, carefully and repeatedly, that the evidence does not support insulin as the primary cause of obesity. Both camps have published formal versions of their models in the same serious nutrition journals, roughly across 2021 and 2022, arguing it out in the open literature. And the honest bottom line is that the debate is ongoing and unresolved. Fung's book presents the insulin story with far more certainty than the science actually earns. When a working clinician tells you a contested theory as if it were plain fact, that is exactly the moment to keep your footing. And it is not just abstract argument. There are direct experimental tests that cut against the strongest version of Fung's claim, and I want to give you the sharpest one because it is the kind of thing his book does not dwell on. Kevin Hall ran a tightly controlled study, the gold standard kind where people live in a research ward and every scrap of food and every measurement is monitored so nobody can cheat and nothing is guessed. He compared cutting fat against cutting carbohydrate. Now, Fung's model makes a clear prediction: cut the carbohydrate, lower the insulin, unlock the fat, and you should lose more body fat. That is the whole promise. But in Hall's carefully controlled study, cutting dietary fat produced slightly more body fat loss than cutting carbohydrate did, even though the low carbohydrate arm did exactly what the theory said, lowering insulin and raising fat burning. The dial moved the way Fung predicts, and the fat loss still did not follow the way he promises. A separate ward study found that a very low carbohydrate diet gave, at most, a tiny edge in energy burned on the order of a few dozen calories a day, nowhere near the dramatic advantage the model implies. These are the results that make many careful scientists say the mechanism, as Fung tells it, simply does not hold up under direct test. Then there are the specific overreaches, and I flagged the biggest one earlier. The claim that fructose is uniquely toxic leans heavily on experiments using absurd doses of pure, isolated fructose, something like 1,000 calories a day of nothing but fructose, a situation that does not happen when you eat ordinary food. That is like proving water is poisonous by making someone drink 40 liters of it. At normal amounts from normal food, the special poison story is a lot weaker than the book suggests. There is also an internal inconsistency that reviewers have gently pointed out. Fung warns you that dairy protein spikes insulin, and elsewhere he leans on the very observational population-level studies that he dismisses as unreliable when they support the other side, for instance when recommending full-fat dairy. You cannot really wave a category of evidence away when it is inconvenient and then lean on it when it is convenient, and even his beloved set point, the thermostat itself, the idea that the body defends a weight is real and well documented. But the claim that insulin is the master dial setting that point is his interpretation, not a demonstrated fact. Appetite, leptin, sleep, the brain's reward circuitry, and the sheer engineered deliciousness of ultra-processed food all push on that thermostat too. Naming insulin as the one true dial is a simplification of a far messier machine. And then there is his strongest rhetorical line of all, the tantalizing idea that calories do not really matter, only insulin does. That the arithmetic is irrelevant and the hormone is everything. I have to be blunt. That framing is not supported by controlled evidence. Total energy balance still governs body weight. Low carbohydrate diets and fasting work when they work substantially because people end up eating less overall, not because low insulin has magically unlocked a fat cupboard that calories could not touch. That is the single most important correction to make to the whole book. The insulin story is a mechanism people find intuitive and motivating, but the plain, boring, well-supported reality underneath the good results is usually that the person ate less food. Now, and this is the part that keeps the reality, check honest rather than merely deflating, I do not want you to walk away thinking the book is worthless or that its advice is bad. Because here is the beautiful twist. Even though the mechanism Fung sells is contested and probably overstated, an enormous amount of his practical advice is genuinely good and overlaps almost exactly with mainstream guidance. This is the counterintuitive turn of the whole episode. He may be right about what to do for reasons other than the ones he gives. Cutting added sugar and refined, ultra-processed carbohydrate is sound advice by almost everyone's lights. It tends to reduce how many calories you eat, often without you even trying, because whole foods are more filling and less engineered to make you overeat, and it genuinely improves the blood markers doctors care about. Intermittent fasting is a real, legitimate, effective weight loss method for many people. This is not quackery. When researchers pool the good studies together, they find that intermittent fasting produces weight loss broadly comparable to old-fashioned continuous calorie counting, and for some people it is simply easier to stick to. Not eating from noon to 8 in the evening is, for many, less mentally exhausting than weighing and logging every mouthful all day. And the metabolic adaptation Fung describes so vividly, the body defending its weight, the metabolism slowing when you diet, that is real and well documented. He did not invent it. He is a wonderful communicator of things that are genuinely true. So where does that leave us? Right in the honest middle. The mainstream verdict on fasting is not that it is magic and not that it is worthless. It is that fasting works about as well as other methods, mostly because it helps people eat less overall, and that its edge over ordinary calorie counting is modest at best. Its benefits also tend to fade over time as people find it hard to keep up for years, which, notice, is the same problem every diet has. There is no free lunch, even in the science of skipping lunch. Fung's win. To eat inside is a real and useful tool. It is just not the physics, defying escape from energy balance, that the boldest passages of the book imply. Let me make this human for a moment, because it is easy to get lost in the studies and forget that this is about actual people standing on actual bathroom scales feeling actual despair. Think of someone, and you may not have to imagine very hard, who has spent 20 years on the diet treadmill. Every January, the resolution. The careful weighing of food, the smaller plates, the hunger carried around all day like a stone in the pocket, the early success, the pride, the smaller genes, and then, month by month, the creep back, the hunger that would not quit, the metabolism quietly banking down, until the weight returned and brought a friend, and with it the crushing private verdict, I must be weak, I must have no willpower, this is my fault. For a person carrying that, the deepest gift of Fung's book has almost nothing to do with insulin molecules. It is the sentence at the very start. You are not weak. The advice was broken. Your body was fighting you the whole time, and you did not know, because nobody told you there was a thermostat in there defending a number against everything you did. That reframing, from shame to biology, has genuinely helped people stop hating themselves and start experimenting calmly with what and when they eat. And even if his mechanism is only half right, that shift in self-understanding is not nothing. Sometimes the most healing part of a wrong in the details theory is the permission it gives you to stop blaming yourself. So what does all of this actually mean for you? The person listening, trying to figure out what to do with your own one body? Let me try to distill it into something honest and usable, holding both halves of the truth at once. It seems genuinely true that constant all-day eating and a flood of refined sugar and processed carbohydrate are not doing your body any favors, and that eating more whole, real, fiber-rich food is a good bet almost no serious scientist would argue with. It seems genuinely true that giving your body longer stretches without food, eating a bit less often, not grazing from waking to sleeping, helps a lot of people, and that for some it is easier to sustain than counting every calorie. It seems genuinely true that when you lose weight, your body will fight to get it back. So slow, patient, sustainable change beats brutal crash dieting that only wakes the thermostat up screaming. And it seems genuinely true that the exact reason all this works is more ordinary than Fung says. It is probably that you end up eating a bit less, rather than that you have hacked a secret hormonal lock. But here is the quietly liberating thing. If the practical advice helps you whether or not the fancy mechanism is right, then you can take the useful part and hold the theory loosely. You do not have to believe every word of the carbohydrate insulin model to benefit from eating fewer processed carbohydrates and eating a little less often. Use the tool. Stay humble about the explanation. And now, the part I promised I would repeat, because on a health topic, it is the most important sentence in the whole episode. Everything I have said is general education about a book and the debate around it. It is not medical advice, and it is not a plan built for you. Fasting in particular is not right for everyone. It can be genuinely harmful for people with a history of eating disorders, for those who are pregnant or breastfeeding, for children, and for people on certain medications, especially some diabetes medications, where going without food while taking a drug that lowers blood sugar can be dangerous. If you take any medication, if you have any medical condition, or if you are even slightly unsure, the move is not to take a doctor's word from a YouTube video, not mine, and honestly not Fung's either. The move is to talk to a real professional who can look at your actual body, your actual history, and your actual medications, and help you decide what is safe for you. A book can give you ideas. Only a clinician who knows you can give you a plan. Before I let you go, I want to bring this all the way down from the level of hormones and famous studies to the level of a street, a suburb, a neighborhood, because that is where food actually happens. Remember that fourth part of the book, the social one, where Fung admitted that obesity is not only chemistry, but circumstance, poverty, time, the cheapness of processed food, the way whole communities can be surrounded by nothing but the very stuff that jams the thermostat up. That is deeply true, and it is bigger than any one person's willpower or any one person's fasting schedule. When the easiest, cheapest, closest food in a whole area is the processed kind, no individual pep talk fixes that. What helps is people locally knowing each other and working together, the neighbor who shares a garden surplus, the parent who starts a walking group, the corner shop owner who stocks something fresh because enough locals asked, the community kitchen where an older person who lives alone shares a real meal and some company instead of eating alone from a packet. Health, in the end, is not only personal, it is woven into whether the people around you are connected enough to look out for one another. And that is exactly the small, stubborn belief behind a project I want to tell you about called Hyperlocal, the simple idea that when the people in your own local world can find each other and work together a little better, everyday life quietly gets healthier, warmer, more human. If that idea moves something in you, come and find out more about Hyperlocal and consider subscribing so we can keep exploring the hidden systems behind ordinary life together, gently and honestly. Because here is where we end back where we began. You were told to eat less and move more. You did exactly that, and you were not lazy and you were not weak, and the weight came back anyway. This book cannot promise you a cure, and its favorite explanation is more contested than it lets on. But it can offer you one thing that is real and that is yours to keep. The failure was probably never your character. There is a thermostat in there, doing what it was built to do, and understanding that even imperfectly, even while the scientists still argue over the wiring, is the first honest step toward working with your own body instead of quietly at war with it for the rest of your life.